round again, it's Nickel Day at Rocky Glen. Hey na, so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again, it's Nickel Day at Rocky Glen.
Hey guys, welcome back to yet another episode of Rocky Glen Park Memories. I'm your host, Andy Zahorsky, Zeke Baby, and I can't thank you enough for stopping by and checking out the video. So, today's video, probably one of the most important rides in Northeastern Pennsylvania's history. It's May of 2021, and this is the 75th anniversary of Sterling's $1 Million roller coaster. It's hard to believe that something of that size was built in 1946. We expect it today in the roller coaster world, but for 1946, this monstrosity was built. Unfortunately, only had 11 years of life, and we'll talk about why that was and its demise, and a lot of other cool things like the name, where the name came from, how long was the track actually. So we got a lot of good stuff that we're gonna discuss today. But before we get to the coaster itself, we have to understand why the coaster itself was built. And that goes back to the story of the Nallen and Jennings and the Sterlings and the war that they had over the park itself. If you're not familiar, Rocky Glen was actually two parks, but there was no real separation. You could walk between both sides with no issue. But when the war time came around, there was a fence, normally called the spite fence to most people, and this spite fence literally did split the park in half. So we're gonna look back on history and understand why the spite fence is actually the reason why the $1 Million coaster was built in the first place. So we've got some great photos, great videos coming, so please stay tuned and check out the video. So let's begin in 1939. The year is 1939, and we're still in the golden age of Rocky Glen. That started around 1919. Rocky Glen is in harmony at this point, and you'll recall that the park is actually split in half. There's two sides to Rocky Glen, but at this point, it's just an imaginary line. Ben and May Sterling are the park managers of the eastern side of the park, while E.S. Williams is the landowner, and you have John Nallen and Joseph Jennings, who are both the park managers and landowners of the western half of Rocky Glen, which is commonly known as Nallen Jennings Park Company. Ben Sterling, in December of 1939, makes a decision to tear down the Mountain Dips coaster after a death in September of 1939 on the coaster. But the lack of a coaster doesn't bother the Sterlings, because they're very friendly with the Nallen and Jennings at this point, and the Nallen and Jennings have their own coaster, the Pippin coaster. So with at least one coaster in the park, there's no urgency on the Sterlings' part to replace the Mountain Dips coaster on their side. We move forward to 1940, and two significant events are going to occur. John Nallen, one half of the owners of the west side of the park, will pass away in August, while the landowner of the east side, E.S. Williams, would die in September. These two deaths would significantly change the direction of Rocky Glen on both sides, and would take us from the golden age of Rocky Glen and into what I call the wartime era of Rocky Glen that'll last for the next 10 years. As we move into 1941, long before Pearl Harbor and December 7th happen, Nallen and Jennings and the Sterlings are beginning their war. Joseph Jennings now controls Nallen and Jennings Park Company, and he wants to charge for parking. But Ben Sterling doesn't. He feels that's a disservice to the people coming for nickel days to make them come for a nickel and then charge them 25 cents to park. Jennings is trying to recoup the money that his company spent to build the old Rocky Glen Road, shown here in red, and also the Fernbrook Bridge in yellow in the bottom left, and the Laurel Line Bridge that went over in the middle. In the end, they went to court in 1942, and the dispute was settled. But it wasn't going to be the end. That was just the first threat of a spite fence. We move forward to 1943, and the war is on. the second spite fence threat will become a reality and will split the park in half, making it difficult for patrons to go to either side of the park. While initially just a wood fence, eventually it would be replaced by a concrete wall with cinder blocks. While the spite fence did its job and kept the park separated, it unfortunately now, it separated the Sterling side from the only coaster in the park. So now, Ben and May had a decision to make. They needed a coaster on their side of the park. The problem was the events in World War II would slow down their progress. Okay guys, that's the story of how the spite fence came about. So the real problem was, again, there was no coaster on the Sterling side of the park. What's not mentioned is that there was a building and construction freeze that was going on in America due to the war. So even back to 41, the Sterlings wouldn't have been able to build any kind of coaster to replace the Mountain Dips, even if they wanted to. So luckily, we're getting close to the end of the war. So we're moving into 1945. And World War II is coming close to an end. So that means the construction freeze that's been going on will be lifted. So the Sterlings are going to contract with a company out of Dayton called the National Amusement Devices, or NAD, to build the coaster. One thing to note that I was unable to find was a picture of the construction supervisor. His name was Vernon Keenan. He's the one who essentially designed and built the coaster. So, unfortunately, I was unable to find a picture for him. So, let's find out how the coaster was built, some of the events that led up during its building, and, we'll check back in after that. We now move into 1945, and the previous building and construction freeze that was placed in America during World War II is now over, with the surrender of Germany on the European theater in May of 1945. This now allows Ben and May Sterling the freedom to purchase and build a new coaster on their side of the park. They immediately contract with National Amusement Device Company, formerly known as the Dayton Funhouse, on the creation of Sterling's coaster. This monster of a coaster would only really cost $100,000 to build, but Sterling would use Seabees coming back from the war to help build his coaster. And also there was a lumber shortage at this time. Sterling got around this lumber shortage by buying the Fernbrook Park coaster, the Wildcat. Now this was PTC coaster number 59, and it was put into the park in 1926. But by the mid-40s, the park suffered because of the war, and would close in a couple years after that, and be replaced by what is today known as offset paperback in Dallas, Pennsylvania. Of course, the war with the Nallen and Jennings is still a hot topic. The Sterlings went to court against the Nallen and Jennings to try to get an access road built in the lake so that they could get their materials over to the far side of the lake. Remember that the Laurel line was on the other side and it was electrically charged, so they couldn't bring materials that way. So they had to build a temporary dirt bridge going across the lake. Of course, this would restrict the flow of the lake as well, and that's why Jennings referred to it as a stink pond. But like most situations, you can't stop progress, and the coaster is eventually built. So Zeke, what's the story with the name? Well, originally the name was simply supposed to be Sterling's Coaster. But the advertisements of that age all said, "Ride the new $1 million roller coaster." And of course, that was carny talk on Ben Sterling's part. But notice the font for Ben Sterling's and roller coaster is all the same, where new $1 million is a lot smaller. But the name stuck, so they kept calling it the $1 million roller coaster. And of course, it only cost $100,000 to build. Well, okay, Zeke, what can you tell us about that supposed 4,700 foot long track? Well, somehow over time, a couple thousand feet were added to the track. We're not really sure how that started. Maybe Ben Sterling doing carny talk, but we're not really sure. But it's safe to say, by looking at this Google flyover, that's measured out the track as if it was flat. That comes out to about 2,600 feet. That's probably more accurate As the papers all said, about 3,700 feet long. Somehow, somewhere over time, somebody added an extra 1,000 on. Nobody knows who. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. There are a lot of interesting things about how the coaster was built, like the name. Sterling's Coaster was the original name. The marquee says it. $1 million was just something they read in the paper. Not unlike the Mountain Dips and the Pippin were confused in the old days in the paper because they said Giant Coaster and they thought the name was Giant Coaster. So the same thing happened with Sterling's Coaster. So it's Sterling's $1 million roller coaster. That's how history will always remember it. Okay, so we're going to move now to 1946, and this is the part you've been waiting for. So we've got a lot of great pictures and a lot of great video. I hope you enjoy it. So why don't we check it out, and I'll see you after it. The year is now 1946, and after a few more tweaks on the track, Sterling's Coaster, or as now we'll refer to it as Sterling's $1 million roller coaster, is finally open for business on May 25th, 1946. What can you say, right? Amazing videos and photos. Thanks to Bob Savakinas and both Nick Petula, who allowed me to show those videos to you guys, and to you guys who have shared all those photos of the $1 Million Coaster. This video would not be made without both of them and all 16,000 of you who have shared pictures. So let's go take a ride on the $1 Million Coaster. So if you're not familiar, one of the group members, his name is Alex Chihawk. He has he's more commonly known as Raptor Alex. He's got a YouTube channel that does recreations of coasters, and one of the coasters that he did was Sterling's $1 Million Coaster. So he graciously allowed me to include that in the documentary, and quite honestly, it would be incomplete without it. It's that great. So let's go take a ride on the $1 Million Coaster, and we'll be right back. Great was that? A ride on the $1 Million Coaster, something we would have never been able to dream we could do. Thanks to Alex for that great video. You can check out his site. If you search YouTube and search Raptor Alex, Raptor like a dinosaur, Raptor Alex, and you'll see his site come up. And there are some great coasters from all over the world that he's done recreations for. They're really great. So we moved through a couple different eras of Rocky Glen. We were at the tail end of what I call the golden age of Rocky Glen, and that was 1919 to about 1940-41. And then we entered the wartime era of Rocky Glen, which mimicked World War II, but Rocky Glen had its own war. And that war essentially was from 1941 to 1951. In 1951, when Nowlin and Jennings had the Great Fire of 1950, they lost the Pippin, the Funhouse, which was the Crystal Dance Pavilion, and Sterling's Penny Arcade was also destroyed. They lost all their stuff, and they basically eventually sold their half to Sterling. So in 1951, Sterling owns now both halves of the park, and that begins what I call the Sterling era, or the heyday of Rocky Glen. So from 1951 to 1971, right before the Ghost Town era begins, we have the Sterling era. And of course, it's highlighted by the $1 Million Coaster. Unfortunately, it runs into some problems. So let's talk about the demise of the coaster and its plan for the future after most of it was torn down. Was it going to continue? It's a question that may never be answered. But there's sure some evidence that shows that. So why don't we follow the demise of the coaster and see where we end. We now move forward to 1957. An inspection of the supports of the $1 Million Coaster revealed that the harsh winters and snow and rain and the water of the lake have ruined the supports. A difficult decision is made by Ben Sterling to tear down the $1 Million Coaster after only 11 years in operation. Remember that the wood used was not pressure treated, it was simply painted. The dismantling began in January and February of 1958, with the wood being taken across the frozen lake and would be salvaged to use to build the next and last coaster at Rocky Glen, the jet coaster, which would be built on dry land and away from water. But was it really going to be the end? From 1958 to 1962, the lift hill and the return tracks still existed while the main body that was over the lake was taken down. Is it possible that they planned on trying to rebuild the $1 Million Coaster all on dry land? They may have certainly considered that, since they had the room where the old Laurel Line tracks were. Unfortunately, in 1962, there was a brush fire that ignited the lift hill and the return tracks, seriously damaging it, all but killing the idea of bringing back the $1 Million Coaster. This brush fire may have been how the rumor or legend started that the $1 Million Coaster burned down in a fire. For the record, it was an Allen and Jennings Pippin coaster that burned down in a fire in 1950. The now closed $1 Million Coaster station would serve a different purpose. It would be rebuilt into a novelty stand, and then also a backdrop for some performers and shows. Later on, it would be rebuilt into a bar and grill. And in the Ghost Town days, it was a palace, which was just a regular photo stand. At some point, the Dodgems building was actually extended farther out, and it actually used the $1 Million Coaster's return tracks as the supports of the structure. Notice the X's that are in the lattice going up. They are the exact same as the X's on the $1 Million Coaster itself. After the park had been closed, the last remnants of the coaster were destroyed on December 24th, 1991, when the bumper cars caught on fire and was ultimately destroyed. Now, what was left of the $1 Million Coaster was fully destroyed. In the end, Sterling's $1 Million roller coaster was probably the most popular and famous amusement park ride in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area and all of northeastern Pennsylvania. Even today, it's still talked about how big it was for 1946. And 75 years after it opened, it's still the talk of the town. And there you have it, the story of Ben Sterling's $1 Million roller coaster. I hope you enjoyed the photos and videos. I definitely want to re-thank again Bob Savakinis. A lot of Rocky Glen history wouldn't be what we have today if it wasn't for him and his DVDs and capturing the footage from several people who had it. And we know footage is out there. And if people have footage on old reels, get in touch with me, send me a message. We can get them transferred for hopefully nothing. We want to be able to see that. We want to share it with the group. We want everybody to see the history of the park that we love so much. Also, Nick Petula, thanks for his video as well. And then all the pictures, again, I can't thank everybody enough. This video would not be made without a lot of the pictures that we captured. And as I always end the videos, I remind everybody to be Sterling in life, named after Ben Sterling. COVID is over. At least it seems like it's getting close to being over. It's May of 2021. The unofficial beginning of summer is this week, Memorial Day. It was always a big time for Rocky Glen. And a lot of people had some bad times over the last year. Don't hesitate to give if you can. You're doing it in the honor of Ben Sterling. That's the way I look at it. That's how I feel Rocky Glen is. And let's keep it going. So please like and share the group. I want to see like an influx of people. It's great to find new people who have photos and the videos. But this group would not be what it is without the people from northeastern Pennsylvania who used to go there. So again, remember that all roads lead to Rocky Glen, and I'll see you in the next video. So stop by the group and say hi.
We went around time and again it's nickel day at Rocky Glen. Ain't I so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again it's nickel day at Rocky Glen. We went around time and again it's nickel day at Rocky Glen. Ain't I so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again it's nickel day at Rocky Glen. Ain't I so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again it's nickel day at Rocky Glen.